Ready? Okay.
Okay, what I need to do is I need to write that.
Okay, it's time to start. Welcome you all to our August 3rd Planning Commission meeting. Thanks for coming. We're going to open this with opening remarks by myself, which I'll give in the way of a prayer, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity we have to gather together as citizens of this county and work together as we plan the future of how we grow and develop, and bless us that we could do so with the interests of everyone in mind, and we can come up with solutions that are the best for the majority of residents of this county. And we thank thee for all the blessings thou hast bestowed upon us in this great rainstorm we received today to help us with our crops and dry conditions. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Okay, we all please join me in the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Is there any changes on the agenda, Angie? Okay, so I take. Oh.
I'm sorry, one moment. Tim, are you doing item 5 for the director? Okay, no, there are no changes.
Okay.
The director is out today, so he will not be in.
With that, I may take a motion for the agenda and minutes, if everyone's had a chance to review the minutes from last month.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
all right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, and it looks like we got about 60 seconds, so we'll hurry and do the consent items. Consent items are items that meet everything according to county code and don't need to be hashed out with a public hearing. They've already met everything. So we've got the Monticello Meadows subdivision request for an extension on that. So unless there's any discussion by commission members, I'd make a motion to approve or deny that, whatever your pleasure is. Probably approve.
I'll make a motion that we approve the extension for the Monticello Meadows subdivision.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay, motion a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now we have the Mountain Home rezone public hearing. Can you give us the information on that, Angie?
So this is a rezone request to rezone 32.67 acres from the agricultural A10 zone to the rural 5 zone. Rezone would allow the parcel to be legally divided into a maximum potential of 6 separate lots as part of the subdivision process. Currently, the A10 would allow for a maximum of 3 lots. So staff has identified some general information as it pertains to the subject property to assist the planning commission and county council in arriving at a decision. This information is included in the attachments and the text of the staff report. Parcel status. It is not in the same size and configuration of August of 2008, but it is a legal parcel as the changes occurred. Oh, and I think I got mixed up. Sorry, it should be 2006. Not that it's. Anyway, sorry. There are just some bits and boundary line adjustments, so it's not in that same configuration. Immediately adjacent to the subject property, the average parcel size with the home, there are 3 parcels with a home and an average size of 5.1 acres. When we extend that to a quarter-mile buffer, there are 11 parcels with a home at 4 acres on average, and then a half mile out with a home. The average size is 4.9 acres, and that's a total of 26 parcels with a home in that half-mile buffer area. And as mentioned, there are single-family homes adjacent to the property that's primarily used for agricultural. It is not located within a municipal future annexation area. The RU5, when it was adopted, was anticipated to be placed in zones in areas of unincorporated county adjacent to municipality. The nearest RU5 zone you can see on the smaller map there. On page 3, that yellow to the east. That is the closest RU5. It's the Michael Allen rezone that was approved in 2012. And then a 4-lot subdivision was subsequently approved in 2013, but they have not expanded it beyond just those 4 lots. The RU5 zone, the purpose as identified in the county land use ordinance is to allow for residential estate development in low density patterns. They can allow for rural subdivisions and smaller scale agricultural uses. This type of development should be located and designed to not unreasonably impede adjacent agricultural uses, nor to unreasonably conflict with the development standards of the adjacent municipalities. The future land use map that was adopted as part of the recent Cache County General Plan, which is attachment B in your packet, identifies the subject property as rural community. Rural community are existing and emerging unincorporated communities, and Cove is identified specifically as one. The preferred land uses are agriculture, ranching, clustered subdivision, conservation easements, with secondary land use preferences for residential uses at densities of less than 1 per 10 acre. Again, the future land use map is just a guide, but it does give some direction. It is not the final word on the land use. Primary access to the subject property is from Mountain Home Road. It's a county road. We have a couple of pictures for you on there at the location of the subject property. It provides access from US Highway 91 into Cove, then becomes Cove Road after crossing the Idaho border, and eventually goes into Franklin where it connects back to Highway 91. Services several single-family homes and ag lands, just right in the middle of the property. Just an interesting nugget, I guess. But you can see the speed limit changes from 30 to 40 if traveling northeast and 40 to 30 if traveling southwest. And that does occur right in the middle of the frontage of the parcel. The parcel also is located on both sides of the highway, so there is a portion of it on the northwest and the south. It's classified as a minor collector road. Minor collector roads provide service to smaller communities and link important traffic generators with rural lands. These routes should be spaced at intervals consistent with population density in order to accumulate traffic from local roads and bring traffic from all developed areas within a reasonable distance from collector roads. It's paved and approximately 22 feet wide, maintained year-round by the county, but is considered substandard as to right-of-way and paved and gravel shoulder width. And then any new access points on a minor collector would need to meet the minimum standards, which is a minimum of 200 feet between driveways and 350 feet between public or private roads. Again, that would be addressed as part of a subdivision process, but is important to contemplate here. The County Fire District had no comments on the rezone. Logan City Environmental also currently provides service in the area. Public notice was posted and sent out to property owners with 300 feet, but received no public comments regarding that. In conclusion, staff has not made a recommendation on this request, but can assist the Planning Commission in drafting that. And we have provided, as part of your packet, a couple of options with conclusions supporting recommendation for approval and denial. With that concludes staff's report.
Any questions from commissioners for Angie? I have one, Angie, on that 200 feet between driveways. Is that on either side of the road?
Yes.
And so looking at that picture on the south, there's one right there. So essentially it'd have to be at least 200 feet north of that for the first driveway.
Right.
And then 200 feet south of that one to the north for the other driveway.
Yeah, and they may need to
And could
do
they-
a public road too. So.
I was gonna say, they could, 2 homes could be served off one driveway
Yes.
on either side of that, so they could meet that probably fairly easily then.
Can we have driveways across the street from each other?
I think county, I think the county engineer would support that. I don't see him here, but I believe if they're, directly across from each other, not staggered, then that is fine.
That was the only question I had, just to make sure they knew where stuff had to be there.
Angie, was there any, if you'll roll your map, move it to the right just a little bit. There's another, go the other way. There's another road right there, county road that this property borders.
is there any county guidance that, because they could also utilize that road, is there any county guidance on that road? Is that road accessible, or is it all gotta be from the Mountain Home Road?
No, I believe this is accessible. I believe there was some development on this property where they had to improve. I believe it was improved a little bit. But yeah, that is an option. They could come off that, but yeah, it would require the, meet county standards of a paved road.
And if they were to use that road, would they have to improve it all the way from there back out to the, because that's a rather narrow gravel
Like
road.
I said, I know there was some development here where they may have had to do some things. I can't remember exactly. I apologize. But, yes, most likely if they were going to access there, they would have to bring it up, improve it all the way back to the main mountain road.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'd entertain
Make
a motion to
that
open
we
the
open
public
the
hearing.
public hearing.
Okay, Lane,
Second.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, is the, sounds like the proponent of the plan is here. Do you want to come up and talk about it? Tell us your name first, so we have that on record.
I'm Clint Hanson. I own Advanced Surveying. I've been helping Sam work out the details of this for a couple of years now. You know, the beauty about this piece, and when you talk about zoning and the RU5 is we've got access to culinary water. And what that does to, that allows us to do smaller lots. You know, our septic drain fields are much, much smaller when we use culinary water. So just like the Allen one, they had, it looks like up there on that one, it looks like they had culinary water as well. You know, the other 5 acres that you approved, 3,000 feet up the hill. But we've got one guaranteed hookup already for residents, and then the Lewiston city tanks right there, and we've talked to them about potential hookups, and once they get some upgrades done, you know, we can most likely get some more shares in there. So we can take, if we turn this into an RU5 with with culinary water, we can do less impact than what we do with wells on a 10-acre zone. We can minimize the impact on the agricultural field by, we have the frontage that we need, but you know, 1 acre simple lots, you know, not any of these big 2.5, 3 acre lots that I do in the county where we need these giant septic fields because the well water is so bad. You know, this property seems ideal for a denser zone because we can accommodate, you know, smaller impact. And then Mountain Home Road, that's a big road. I mean, that goes all the way up to Preston. It might be under standard. It looked pretty good to me when I was up there. But if we needed to improve that, we could. That back road, that is a very tiny, undedicated road that comes to a 90-degree angle that no fire truck could ever use or make. So I doubt we'll take on that access point. It would be better just to put our lots along, you know, Mountain Home Road. But we're literally sitting halfway between what you guys already done, a 5-acre zone up the hill. You got 2 more down the hill, and we're just right in the middle of it. And with the bonus of having, you know, the ability to do culinary water, I think it fits the plan for, you know, having denser lots. You know, they stake these lots that are the size of a football field, and the landowner's just like, well, what am I going to do with all this property? It's like, well, you're going to dig up alfalfa, and you're going to put a septic drain field underneath it.
Yeah, so just so so your drain field won't be any smaller if it's culinary or well water.
Culinary.
Yeah, that's what I was,
It's
But
much,
most
much
of it,
smaller.
most of it's based off number of bedrooms in a home. And so it's the distance between your drain field and your well that sometimes makes those lots bigger, because you have to have that footage away from your
I
well.
don't like the way Millville did it, but you know, their 30-acre lots with their septic systems just up and down. I can't do half-acre lots in the county. I would, because I would rather do a half-acre lot with maybe another half-acre easement in the alfalfa field to be less impactful on the ag.
Yeah.
Half an acre.
I've tried to do one, they said they had to be a little bit bigger, but that's my idea.
Yeah, and part of that depends on with the health department. If the soils don't allow your well, your drain field to be far enough from your well, but if you're on culinary, you could potentially do half-acre lots.
It just makes sense if, I just think when I look at zoning, if you're ever gonna change an A10 to RU5, you gotta have that culinary bonus with it, I mean, it just seems like the only reasonable way to keep our ag, keep what we have, and we have it, like I said, there's two water lines that run right through our property.
And currently, you've got one connection for sure.
One, we have a for sure connection, and then, like I said, we've been talking to the city, it's the city water tanks right there, and there's already kind of a line that runs to our field, but,
So
they
who's-
said we
who's-
could-
Who's providing the culinary water?
the one connection's Goslin.
Private for just co.
So we got that one, for sure, and then, potential, once they upgrade the Lewiston tank, then, we should be able to buy some shares from them too, to do the other ones, but I think lots that have culinary water that are in the county are just gems. I mean, you don't get any better than that, we got secondary and culinary here.
So, but it doesn't sound like there's a guarantee for culinary water.
Not
You don't
guaranteed.
have a letter that says we can service
There's not.
6 lots. or
There's
whatever.
not, but we could do the 5, or we do 1 at least, and, I still think the location and with the size of Mountain Road and with the infrastructure that's there, and then we even have a fire connection just not too far north of our line, where your fire truck can hook into a 2.5-inch line and, feed his truck while he's putting out fires, so got that bonus too. And with 26 homes around the area within, 5-acre lots, in my opinion, it kind of seems like it's a good idea. But I think Sam wants to say something.
My name is Sam Douglas. It was Sam Larson. I'm a Douglas now, resident of Cove all my life. In conclusion, I would just like to say my plan for the property is just to have my son have an opportunity to have a home on family homeland. I know growth is coming, and my objective to these pieces is not to be sold off, but to be ready for the growth when it does come. It's inevitable, and I'd much rather be prepared than not. Having the culinary hookup, no, we don't have them for all 5, but my intent is not to sell and be at that point yet. It's just being prepared for the future. In conclusion, I just want to say I just kind of want to see if I can get the same opportunity as some of the others that have had these, done for them as far as the pieces. And I think that's it. Do you guys have any questions for me as far as the land?
Don't really have any other.
I have one more comment. So I have a concern that if we proceed now with the subdivision that she wants to do, and we stay in the 10-acre zone, that we're not gonna have the opportunity to rezone down the road. I think it's gonna lock us in place where you guys divided it as a 10-acre zone, you're stuck with that forever. That's my concern, and that's why we wanna do this now before and we're fine locking in a 5-acre zone for good. And even if you have a restriction that's like, okay, 5-acre zone, as long as you get culinary water, I mean, we'd be okay with that. But I have a huge concern for my client that if she goes now, we're gonna be stuck with 3 lots forever. And I don't know if you guys can validate that or not. I don't know if we've ever got to that point where we amend a subdivision that was done as a 10 acre but that's why I want to try to do this now, so that it's set up so that we don't get stuck down a path that we can't divert from. That's.
Mr. Chairman? I have a question. So I'm still confused. How can you have a smaller septic tank with culinary water versus well water?
Because most of the bad stuff that comes out of the septic is the bad well water. Most of the county well water is pretty bad anyways. I've seen just a handful of clean water, but that's the whole reason why Millville can put all those homes on 3rd acres, is because when you put them on culinary, it takes all the bad stuff out of the water, it's clean, and your septic system, your drain.
The reason I asked, I've never ever heard of that before. So
It's just the way it works, so.
Yeah, I think all of us that are on well water probably dispute what you're saying.
Yeah, I think so. Working with the health department, yeah, I've never worked with them on a project that,
Well, I mean, that's the only
Size of
way,
the septic
it's the only way
changed.
they can put that many homes up on a place like Millville. is
well,
if
they
it's
can do it because their source, their culinary source isn't next to their drain field. And they have really gravelly soils, so their septic drains faster. Like out where I'm at, clay, you have long drain, so it's based off number of bedrooms and soil type.
Yeah, I've always
Perk
been.
tests.
Yeah, I mean, out of all the waterproofs I've done, turn your guys' water on 500 times, that stuff turns cloudy after about half hour running of most of them. And so it just depends on the health department. But if you want us to have the health department confirm it, we can. But either way, we still want to minimize our density. And if we do need bigger septic drain fields, we'll do easements in the farm field rather than do a residential lot, so we can still farm it. That's my main goal on most of these I do. I want to keep the lot small, then still farm alfalfa the drain fields under, basically. But that's what I've always gone off of. I could be wrong.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Angie, can you comment on if this goes to a subdivision under A10, does that preclude being able to rezone that property in the future?
It does not, but if there are different property owners that come into play at some point, all of the property owners within that subdivision boundary would have to agree.
So
to
that's
it.
it's a complication, but
Yeah.
Consensus.
Yeah. So, yeah. much easier if
everybody
it's just
within that
one.
subdivision would have to agree to the rezone.
If we're just your son and you owned the rest, it would be easy. If you sold 3 lots and then wanted to come get 3 more, it would be harder. If it was just your sons, it'd be pretty
At least one
easy.
other time where that's come back and one of the people that got a lot came back and wanted to subdivide,
Just
to
their lot.
rezone and subdivide that. And the original owner of the original parcel's like, whoa, hold on, what's going on here?
Well, we did one pretty recently,
And they
that one
lose the-
between Wellsville and Mendon. That was a A10 and they came back and switched it to actual RU2, I think. Maybe.
I think that was Denali Horse Ranch.
I can't remember which one it was, but
Yeah,
it has been done recently even. Yeah.
It is possible. Creekside Estates would be one example of multiple property owners that actually all agreed to do it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Hey, I just have one more concern or question. So, again, since that road wasn't addressed, if this was to be approved tonight, to be rezoned as an RU5, that road would have to be paved from the north end of it all the way out to the main. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. If they came in with their subdivision plat and showed us that they were taking access off that, then yes, that would be true. We did meet with the applicant previously, and as I recall, it's been a while, the county engineer said that would definitely have to be dedicated, but it may not need to be approved if they're not accessing that portion.
Can I jump in just for a moment?
Oh, yeah, come up and state your name.
I'm Diane Anderson. I own the property that you're talking about with the road, the concern on the road, on this, yep, that one right there. So we submitted to build a home in that corner on the north side, and the county has requested that we tar from off the main road all the way down to the end of ours, full engineered, everything, $150,000 or more. So at this point, I'm not doing it, so.
So I will say, one thing you can do with the county is you can get multiple bids on that, and you can pay in lieu of. So
No.
we've had 2 other people do that recently
Yeah,
that,
I'm not-
instead of pave the road.
By the time you
That is an
pay-
option, to not
by-
actually pave it.
Well, by the time, this was 3 years ago, so of course it's gonna be more. So by the time you do that, you build a home, you're into it $500,000. I'm not doing that.
So what are you guys building there? Is that a
We
shop?
just have an accessory shed shop. Yeah, that's it. We can't have a home there. So I'm part of the Larson family, and we wanted to keep that in the Larson family.
And you don't have enough, I mean, you've probably met with the
As
man
you can
enough. You
see,
can't come off the other
up on
road.
that top road, where it comes off onto the main Mountain Home Road,
Yep.
we had Clint do that for us because we were gonna come in off that top road. So we did all the permits, we tore a house down, an old house, and then the road guy come in and said, oh, you can't build on that road because that's a road, right? You have to build on the B road, which is the lower, so then they pushed us down to the bottom. So we've been into that a little bit of an expense, so, but that road, they want us to go from the very top in front of these other 2 properties all the way down to the corner of our property and tar.
It's a single
Well,
wide.
that whole property too, we're not seeing it as well here, but that property slopes pretty good. From the
Yes,
main
it
road,
does.
the Mountain
It
Home Road,
does.
down in.
It does,
So-
it does, and we looked at that as well, but they didn't bring that to our attention when I submitted all my permits. They give me the go-ahead in the very beginning. It wasn't until Matt Phillips got up there with whoever his employee that approved all the permits, then they decided, and they moved it down. So we've been into this going on 3-4 years. So that road won't ever be done on that lower road. I'm not doing it. So whoever else comes in there and wants to do that, that's fine, but I'm not gonna do it. But I have no problems with what Sam's doing. We are the adjustant piece right there, and so I support her, whatever she is doing with our family lot, or our family land.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience that would like to speak for or against, or? Okay. Commissioner, if you got any other questions before we go out of public hearing?
Make a motion, oh, well, you got it.
Randy's got it.
Step up.
Okay.
Okay, my name's Randy Priest, and I own the home just to the north of their property there. And what we did 10, 11 years ago is we developed the Gosselin Spring up there. And we put a 50,000 gallon water reservoir that's right at the very tippy top, right where that road switches back and heads towards the north. For her culinary water, what I've told her that she can do, and she already owns a right-of-way through there that was established in 1955 when Boyd Larson bought that land from the county. It was foreclosed on from my Uncle Francis. But right at the top where the water reservoir is, she has a right-of-way that comes through there, and it's an irrigation one. But I've told her that I would provide a right-of-way through there. She can tap into the trunk line of the Gosselin Spring and bring it down and then bring it along the fence line there. That way, if she goes up high, then she can put a hydrant and stuff up there to water cattle or do as she pleases up there, and then bring the water down to the road. And that's how she could get her culinary water, and she already owns one share in the system. And that's the guaranteed water that we've been talking about. And it's as simple as that. She can use her irrigation right away and put it in that ditch, or she can go 10, 20 feet below, and then just cross the fence line and then tee it and go straight down the hill. So that's all I'm going to say, and I have no problem being the neighbor as close as what I am. Drake's are a little bit probably closer unless we go halfway with the one home, but I have no problem. And the way that farm ground is up there, it's solid rock for about the first 100 feet up into that field, and then it turns into pretty good farm ground. So put a home on rocky ground, that's the best thing to do, and then preserve the rest of it up there that they can farm it and use it that way. And that's why my house is where it's at, is because that was the rockiest place on the farm. And I put that house there 39 years ago. Okay.
Before you sit down, could I ask a question? Are there additional connections available in that Gosling Spring?
Not right now. Ever since Diane bought her share, we've kind of put a moratorium on it for 5 to 6 years. And we kind of want to space it out, and we don't want to have somebody come in and buy too many shares from it, and to be able to use them all up now. We're just looking farther down the road that a grandkid or somebody else would want a share of water, that something would be available, farther down the road.
How many families or homes do you have on that culinary system? How many?
We have 22 hookups, or 22 shares into it, and I think there's 20 people that are on it right now. I guess I should know that, but I'm not exactly sure. But we have adequate water there. That spring flows quite a bit. And 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when we developed that, we spent about $555,000 on that, and that water is as clean as can be. We use maybe 1 bottle of chlorine every 2 years or 3 years to be able to meet the county's specs on our cleanliness. So it's turned out really well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, any other comment from the audience? No, we're good there.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, commissioners, what would you like to do? With further discussion, and then we can make a motion.
Does seem like everybody wants a place out in the county. I'm on the edge of where it's turning city really fast.
Yeah, you're going really fast next to you.
But it looks like this has all the makings for an RU5 that, it says if you got culinary there, that makes a huge difference as far as tapping wells and that kind of thing. It's always been our concern, but do we want to see that kind of development? It looks like the neighborhood around there wants to see that kind of development.
Well, I think the most telling piece of information is within that half-mile buffer, there's 26 parcels with a home of 4.9 acres. So I think you already have that rural community right there, so.
Yeah, as you leave Cove and go around that curve, you're not gonna notice a difference in the density.
And I think this is a good opportunity for us. I mean, we spent a lot of time working on the general plan and identified communities, rural communities, came up with that designation. And this is one of the areas that we outlined that this does make sense. And I think we've been fairly consistent as we've had a few of these come in over the years in that area.
Nolan, how do you think the commissioners feel about it? Because last month we approved for the council an R2 designation, and that didn't even get a second look at from the council. But that was certainly a different scenario. But
I think just exactly what you're talking about here. The impact from water is great. What Mr. Benoit pointed out here is that area has already been in the 5-acre area, so I think we would be fine with that. I think it fits exactly what we're talking about. So, from my standpoint, I think it's what we're trying to head to. I mean, you can see from the picture what they described as the rocks from the road. You can see that there's some of that green doesn't look like it's been disturbed because it's so rocky. So, with the spring and everything else there, I think this makes sense.
Angie, real quick, what's the red hatch pattern there?
Subdivision.
Okay, so that's an existing subdivision.
Cove Mountain Estates.
All right, commissioners, what?
Given this discussion, Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval to the County Council of the Mountain Home rezone with option 1, the 2 conclusions in option 1.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Can you meet with the county council next?
And just to let you know, the county council meeting will probably be the first week in September, but I'll confirm it with you.
There's really no difference if your water comes out of a spring. No. Or a well. It's the same water.
Yeah.
But I've never heard, yeah, I don't know.
Just because
I did a quick search. I was gonna text Grant.
It's the same water. Put a pipe in.
put it on the sewer system.
I was trying to find
Tell you
the
what,
water right to see how many homes.
Pretty torn on that one. I could have
They're limited.
very easily voted against it
Put on the
because
spring. It's called
that
it's
ground
the same as
doesn't
putting a
even
well.
do
It's no
justice to
different.
how
You're pulling
steep
more
it
water
is
out
off
of
of there.
another home.
It's,
Just trying to find that on here, but I can't.
So was there a limit
the
of
only thing
22
I would
shares
say
like
is
they
if
said,
they
or what?
touch that road.
How many
which
how many
that's
homes
my
their water
concern.
right?
You're gonna get it approved and then they're gonna run out.
Trying to figure out how he spelled the.
But we oughta, I mean, they'll
It's-
have to come
it's
back
on the-
before us. It's
it's
gotta
here.
be stipulated very strong. If there's any access on that road at all, that bucker's
Oh, it's
gotta
on
be
that.
paved.
You got the parcel of.
Yeah, yeah.
Cause that's the
I mean,
crap that
How many homes are on it, or what?
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, on that water right. Goslin, Goasl.
ASLAND? IND. Osland. Come up either, there's a water right.
Doesn't know where to look.
Yeah. Well, I can get there.
You should be able to tap on that and come up with a,
Yeah,
languages on that one.
yeah, if I can find their. What it is for sure. Get water right number 25.
Where are we reading?
Spring Water Company. Oh, sorry. Tim, I thought you were still pulling your stuff up. Take it away, Tim.
Right.
We're in our side conversation over here.
Well, good to be with you, and sorry that Stephen Nelson's not able to join us today. He's not feeling well, and asked that Angie and I fill in and present on his behalf. The work I should say the updates represent quite a bit of work to refine the amendments to sensitive areas and density definitions.
Yeah.
And most recently, and what I'll put up on the screen shortly, is just some refinements as of today that reflect staff final review yesterday. We met as development services, planning, public works, and fire staff to just take one final review, and we saw some opportunities to clarify and improve what we think are improvements to the text. That's handed out as a hard copy to you, represented by the yellow highlights, which I'll have on the screen shortly. But this is a continuation of the hearing that was posted for last month's meeting, January Planning Commission meeting, at which this item was continued for further review. And so just a quick review of some of the graphics we've been looking at for the last several months related to steep slopes and other non-developable sensitive areas such as wetlands. And here you see in the center the 40 acres, representation of 40 acres, 1 unit per 10 acres. And one of the key questions has been, should non-developable sensitive areas be deducted when calculating density? And this image shows what it would look like if they're not deducted. And say if you have wetlands or slopes over 30%, you could still achieve the density, the gross, based on the gross acreage rather than a net acreage. And another question, as you see kind of the depiction of a driveway or a road extending through steep slopes, could that occur to allow for development where it is on not impacting a non-developable area? So those are some of the key questions that we'll look at in text form. And then this image showing a depiction of potential band of steep slope through an otherwise relatively moderate or mildly sloping area. And just provided this graphic for you to reference. And what you see are various measurements in an area that includes flatter ground as well as moderately sloping ground represented by the yellow, and slopes over 30% represented by the red, and various measurements of the thickness or the horizontal depth of these steep slope areas. And what you'll see referenced in the text, and some of the latest refined text, is the potential for some flexibility, not just for the roads and drives, but also for structures. That sometimes folks want to build a nice walkout basement, and that interfaces with potential for some steep slopes. And it's one thing to build on a kind of this shelf or this band of steep slope area, quite different from building at the toe of a mountain or a large bluff area. And so these different measurements reflect that there's a range, right? There's kind of the narrow band shown where you see the 66 and 50-foot measurement, and then moderate thickness of steep slope band showing this kind of 75 to 155 or so, and then a more substantial steep slope area in the 270. So we can come back and look at this image as we're reviewing the text. Okay, so with that brief introduction, I'd like to get into the text, proposed amendments, noting that these highlights represent recent refinements that we as staff feel that makes this more clear and more consistent between sections of code. And so the definition of sensitive area, non-developable, is proposed to be amended to read that the following sensitive areas shall not be considered developable other than the exceptions provided in item 4 below. And those exceptions are similar to what you've seen before. And then we've further clarified in this kind of introductory statement that any acreage encumbered by this, by said areas shall not be considered when calculating development density in FR40, RU5, and RU2 zones. So in other words, the A10 would not be subject to the sensitive area removal from that calculation of density. And just a slight reference in the wetlands is that there's just a cross-reference for clarity. I'm sorry, that should have been underlined as proposed, additional clarifying text. And then the definition of steep slopes. Currently reads as land with an average slope over 30% over horizontal distance greater than, and it currently reads as 20 feet. And it's proposed to just increase that for some more flexibility to 50 feet. What's magic about 50 feet? It's more than 20, but it's not too much. And yet you'll see some other references that provide some additional flexibility with respect to some of the more limited slope areas. So the additional definition suggests that small washes, hills, or rock outcrops, which have slopes distinctly different from surrounding property, may be excluded from slope determination by the Development Services Director if the exclusion of such small areas from slope determination will not be contrary to the overall purpose of this title. And it was funny, a month or two ago, we saw an application and there was this little red circle that appeared, and looking at the property, it turned out to be a dump truck or two full of fill and dirt, and, you know, so there's a steep slope on the property, but that and whether it's man-made or natural anomalies to the topography, it really, if it doesn't cause harm for public health, safety, welfare, and meets the intent and spirit of this ordinance, then there could be some discretion applied. All right, and then natural waterways, steep slopes, wetlands are considered non-developable, but the exceptions to that would be as proposed here in item 4. No development occurs in these non-developable sensitive areas except for the following. A would be required public roads, utilities, and/or facilities in accordance with county road and fire access requirements. B would be private roads, drives, and utilities. We feel that for now, putting a cap on a maximum slope of 50% would be wise until we can further coordinate with Public Works Engineering and compare road development standards with zoning code standards, that if there is ever an increase above 50%, that those are well coordinated with design standards. But in the interest of time and the effort that would be required to coordinate between those.
Also have a average over a certain distance. I mean, one of the concerns that we had on this is if you've got a borrow pit on the edge of the road, I can have a 50% slope there, but it's for a few feet. And I think that's where we started in this discussion, was the way it was written, we couldn't put a culvert in and fill a borrow pit to gain access from the main road. So 50% is great, I support that, but does it have a spatial distance or anything like that that limits that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think going back to the definition of steep slope, that if it's less than that 50-foot horizontal measurement, then it's not a steep slope.
As revised.
As revised, correct. And so there is that initial definition.
That would apply.
Or standard that applies.
Okay.
And so then where there are steep slopes, i.e. over 30% and
50.
measured longer than 50
50
feet,
feet, okay.
then we're saying a cap of 50% for developing roads. And if needed, we could revisit this in the future. Item C, well, I just note that county road and fire access requirements are always referenced in private roads as well. And then C, structures. So development with respect to access and utilities and roads is singled out now to a narrow focus on structures, homes, accessory structures. That these structures may be built on limited steep slope areas with a defined development area based on the following studies to be included in a land use application. So one would be a site plan showing a defined development area within the boundaries of the parcel or lot where structures are proposed. And so this gives a more precise definition of where and how that defined study area occurs. Well, it needs to be on the actual parcel or lot where the structure is proposed and not capturing any area outside of that. 2, the development area shall not include any portion of steep slope areas that measure perpendicular to the contour line over a horizontal distance of 100 feet or greater. So we just go back to this graphic. Showing those perpendicular measurements to the contour line. So if it becomes deeper, a deeper perpendicular measurement than 100 feet, then it would be considered to be too much continuity of steep slope to be considered for exemption for structure. And then the last, let's see. I'm sorry, I just lost my spot, so.
Just down. Next page.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so 3, the average grade of the proposed grading plan shall not exceed 30% measured by cross-section drawings across any portion of the defined development area. So there are some studies and drawings needed to demonstrate that the overall measured slope is not exceeding 30%, and that they show a grading plan and then cross-section. And then finally, a slope elevation study, topography study, and geotechnical report must be provided. There's quite a bit of work to do for them to, for an applicant to propose a structure,
Tim,
and for that matter, a road. But yes.
so let's define structure here. I've been talking with you guys a lot about somebody who wants to build a hay barn, and we're requiring them to do a seismic study for a hay barn. So I'd like your point there, elevation study and geotechnical. Some of these reports are quite expensive versus what the structure is going there. And if it's not human rated, what are we doing there?
That's a good question. I'd like to jump ahead to that specific section of this code. This is something.
Seems like we're requiring.
Colin, could you just clarify that one more time? So you're concerned about a geotechnical report even if you're putting up a hay shed?
Yes. If it's not, if there's no humans gonna be in there, we're asking citizens who wanna put a hay shed up to go do a seismic study.
And what would ever trigger them, because they don't even need a building permit for that, correct?
They do an ag permit,
Yeah.
supposed to.
And a zoning clearance permit.
But why do we have that? Why are we requiring a seismic for a hay shed?
This is saying,
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
he's saying we shouldn't.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because my point is I've got 4 citizens in the last 2 weeks who've come before the county to do a hay barn. There's gonna be no man, no apartment or anything in there, and we're saying you've gotta do a seismic or a geographic study.
If it's on a steep slope.
So,
And
That
along
ought to
with
be on
that,
habitational only.
huh?
That ought to be on habitational only.
That's what I'm saying. We need to define structure so that we're not imposing this cost on a farmer who
Ridiculous.
wants to put a hay shed. Because here's a farmer who wants to put up a hay shed, and it's summer, he's putting up hay. He's like, by the time I get my study done, it's gonna be rotten hay, so.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
After today, it's
Okay,
rotten
guys,
anyways.
Simmer down. Tim's
It's
about to
rotten.
tell us he's got that fixed. Right here with this
Why
Tim.
he's asking.
Quit reading ahead, Chris.
Okay.
Could you seriously just-
I think there could be a useful cross-reference, because sometimes just clarity between one section of code that provides an exception to another section of code might be useful. So just jumping ahead to a proposed amendment to the sensitive areas section, and this is specifically 1718.5, geologic hazards, noting that geologic hazards would include, but not limited to faults, landslides, steep slopes, unstable soils. The state defines geologic hazards to include liquefaction areas. So steep slopes is covered here, and the proposed text amendment here is that the Development Services Director may, at their discretion, waive these requirements, and the requirement would be the geotech study associated with this. And Jen, need a little help to find that text.
What
there, the
page is that on, Tim?
This is page
Fourth page.
Second to the last page. Note the requirement for geotechnical study or geologic hazards.
It's under 5 there. On review and approval of geotechnical report identifying.
There it is. Yep.
So did you say the state requires that?
A state defines a geologic hazard to include liquefaction. So I was just giving examples of the types of potential geologic hazards, which include steep slopes. But the amendment to this section of code would state that the development director may waive these requirements, such as a geotechnical report, for structures under 200 square feet and for agricultural buildings not for human occupancy as defined by state code. And then a geotech report shall be required if necessary to protect an individual from a condition likely to cause imminent injury or death. So at least there's that director discretion to review and see if there's, if it's appropriate to waive the geotech.
I think I personally would rather,
Take it out.
something less, with less discretion for staff and more discretion, more clear cut
Yeah, that's what
on those things. I mean, I look at things like liquefaction. You're more in that world, has there ever been a liquefaction event in Cache County where, I mean, we've had some significant earthquakes in this county. Have we had liquefaction events? I mean, is that, sometimes it seems like we're engineering people to death on some of these things. If liquefaction is an issue, I'm all for having it in there. But I've never seen, I mean, we've seen Mexico City with earthquakes where buildings tip over because of liquefaction. I've never.
I think we've been lucky to not have a serious earthquake, and that's what's gonna cause the problem.
But I mean, we've had six, 7 was the Richmond earthquake, something?
Yeah, I was gonna say in the 60s.
6.2, 6.7, something like that. I mean, it was a significant quake, and I know we had damage, but I didn't see anywhere where that was liquefaction. Anyway, that's beyond the point, but it's kind of the example of, do we want to have a, I think sometimes it's easy to say, let's require some reports so we cover all the bases. I think there should be some sort of a justification if it's on a land that's described by the state as a geologic hazard. Well, that makes sense. Do we have an overlay for that, Angie, that shows geologic hazards?
I've got an Angie.
Well, one of the people is talking, the county says he's on a fault line, but there's already buildings on fault lines. So
We got buildings all over the fault line.
Exactly. So if it's a hay barn and not man-rated, I'm wondering why we just don't say, okay, proceed at your risk or whatever
It
else.
doesn't matter until there is an earthquake, right?
Right.
Once there is one.
Then if the hay barn falls down, it's okay.
Well,
But
yeah.
a non-habitable,
Yeah.
I think.
Right, I think
Not habitable, exactly. That's
you
what
got a
I'm
better
trying to
chance of
say
wind
is,
than snow.
With those buildings though, if we're not requiring engineering, which I've got the permit for, I've been through the process, you pay $50 and all you have to do is draw a map with your boundaries, unless that's changed recently. But if we're not even requiring engineering on the building, why are we requiring for an ag building? It shouldn't even be at discretion. It shouldn't be required for an ag building unless it's habitational.
yeah, discretion's wide open.
Yeah, that's,
That-
and,
that-
and,
there's
and
too
those
much
directives
leeway there.
change, and yeah, I don't like the.
It should be not at all.
discretion at all.
Taylor, you and Stephen had some discussion about this. I don't know what your current thoughts might be.
I think one of the issues that I personally have identified is that, especially as it comes to agritourism, it may be styled as a pure hay shed, that the only thing that will ever be in there is a hay shed, but if we are having corn mazes and the hay shed does double duty as a shop or a dance hall, which that kind of activity has been known to happen in the county, where I get it, farmers are trying to make a living and they're trying to extract as much revenue as they can out of their assets. I understand that, but there is a temptation, in my opinion, to set up ostensibly agricultural buildings that don't meet the same requirements, that don't have the same safety regulations, and then the second that evaluation is over, stuff them with people. So
Yeah, I think
But-
that's, so, I think if and when that happens, which I think is
it's
probably
conditional
fairly
use permit.
limited.
That's what I'm saying. We got the
One,
CUP.
they should, if they're doing a big event, corn maze, if they're having a big thing like that, they're coming in for a conditional use permit.
To me, you've got the option
And
there.
then they may have to re-engineer that hay barn. I don't think we penalize all the farmers because one or two are
Might do something.
illegally, you're trying to say it nicely, but they're converting their barn to some other use and getting through the permitting the easy way. I think
We've
that's,
got dairy barns that are
that's
turning
the
into
exception,
apartments or
not the
offices or
rule.
whatever else.
Yeah.
To my remembrance, we've had two situations in the last 10 years. We had the current winery that was applied for as an ag building, but then they had to come into compliance with their winery permit. And then we had another agri-tainment, Gibbons Green Acres, that had built a bunch of buildings and sheds using them for restaurants under the ag clause. But because of them having to come up to code, to meet the code, they chose, instead of upgrading their buildings, they closed down. And I agree with our chairman that I think if they want to misrepresent it up front, whether they intend to do it or not, that's,
Won't we catch that in a CUP hearing?
what's that?
Won't we catch that in a CUP if they are gonna do that?
Yeah, if they came in for one, yeah.
If they didn't, that's an enforcement
So
issue.
that's the risk that you run. There's no perfect options. There's no perfect solutions. The risk that you run is, do we err more on the side of prevention, or do we try and err more on the side of enforcement? And if you think prevention is going to be easier, I would advise you to lean more on that. If you would rather prefer to come around on the back end and enforce, if you believe that would be easier and more effective, then I would lean towards.
We just hired an enforcement officer, right?
Well, why can't we tell the farmer to say, look, we're not gonna require this, sign this form, you're not gonna intend any.
But if you change your use,
You change your use, get back.
it ought to
in
be
there.
right in the application.
That seems to take away some of the discretion, but it puts it on there. Now, granted, if I sell that piece of ground and another farmer comes in, they don't have that same knowledge that that's been signed, but I mean, even before I come in here, I had a guy call me and he says, I have retained a seismic guide. Do I have to do it to build my hay barn? So I'm like, I hope we don't have to have him do a seismic study. to put up a hay barn.
$5,000.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you're paying what, $1,200 at least, when you pay $50 for your permit and no engineering.
Well, this seismic, he says, is anywhere from $38,000 to $5,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
So hopefully we can figure out how to put that in there and make you happy. And yeah, I agree, we need to protect the county, but we can't engineer these guys to death for a hay barn or something like that, I'm like, good night.
I mean, there's the opposite end of the spectrum, and I've got a bluff that's obviously sloughing off, and somebody wants to build a house on top of it. Well, that's something that should definitely be considered in the review process. We don't want people's houses tumbling off of this bluff. But a hay barn out in the flats, that seems pretty innocuous there, and so.
Well, here's something to consider. And I'm just jumping back to the structure exception to build on some limited steep slope areas. And so the last, just recently added provision could be that agricultural structures and accessory structures less than 200 square feet are exempt from these standards as provided for. Then I refer to.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, that's a question I had, maybe where the 200 and park one trailer, 10 by 20.
I just repeated what.
Oh,
so it
yeah, I
says
took that out of the other one.
structures and accessory structures.
yeah, and.
Less than 200 square feet. So that's consistent with what the draft text is.
Any ag structure and only accessory structures less than 200 square feet, right?
Even if you have a 200 square foot structure, though, if it's gonna be inhabited, it ought to fall under whatever habitational, because,
Then it wouldn't be an accessory structure though.
but if it's just
So it's a
ag,
tool shed or something you're building up
My
there.
question was on the 200 square feet, that's just awfully small.
It is,
And-
horribly small.
I mean, I would suggest we do something more like 400 square feet.
I think it relates to building code, doesn't it? And building permit is required above 200 square feet.
For like,
Something it's in another code somewhere.
but I think the way it reads is it makes it sound like the ag structure can also be.
Oh, okay, 'cause they're, yeah, that's
But the ag structure can be any size.
Like if we put that.
Just reads funny.
Or
Let's go back
accessory
down.
structures less than,
I'm not aware of any building code requirements for that kind of size or whatever, so maybe that's something y'all can check on, but.
Yeah, 200 square feet in our building department, they do not need
Permit.
a building.
But if it's larger than 200?
Interesting.
Okay, so I was just trying to capture what's in list form here, and it sounds like blending them with an and
Bigger than that.
maybe triggered a little bit of a
You don't even build-
misunderstanding.
For that.
If it's over.
Maybe a
200
comma
square
would
feet.
help. Agricultural structures
Wow.
and accessory structures less than 200 square feet are exempt from these standards as provided
Another
for.
comma after feet then. So that it's perfectly set aside.
Nice, Chris.
If it comes to habitational though, yeah, as long as we've got backing, if 200 feet is the minimum, like Chris has already said, but I would even be fine if 200 square feet had to have the study. I just would rather see ag totally off.
Okay,
I mean, can you put something, most hay sheds don't have water or anything to them. So can we talk about utilities to meet what you're saying as far as eventually that turns into something?
Yeah, but I think even a few do, I mean, few have water.
Yeah, to their,
Yeah.
water the cattle and stuff, but then
right.
all the other stuff, I'm just trying to
Yeah, you're
figure
not
out
gonna
how
have all
that
that
we.
with it. As soon as you put that, then it's no longer on the definition of a ag building,
Well,
so.
it just, we instruct our applicants that they don't need a building permit, but if they run power or other utilities, they need a utility permit. But they don't have to do the structural, and it's just to make sure the electrical's added safely to the structure. So I just jumped back down to geologic hazards, and I would just ask, since we've kind of been discussing this, if you'd like to see the wording change here related to the discretion.
okay.
Or just make it absolute.
The earlier discussion was just, not on having the development director's discretion, but just these are exemptions.
Yeah.
Exemptions include structures under 200 square feet and
Yeah.
ag buildings not for human occupancy.
I was just looking at the building department's website, and they say detached storage sheds, 1 story with floor space not exceeding 200 square feet, permit not required.
Thanks, Angie.
So if we were to say these requirements are waived for
See a way to write that any different, Taylor? I mean, I get what you're saying, because we are facing the agritourism thing, but there's gotta be a way to weigh agritourism, but there's also a way to say, farmer who's trying to make it as a farm doesn't spend so frickin' much money to bake a hay barn.
My personal feeling is it's more towards deregulation. I'm just trying to present from both sides as best I can.
Would we be okay though to still include in pretty bold letters in the application for an ag building that if your use changed to include habitational or agritainment or anything else, then you would have to you'd have to come back to comply with those standards?
So that standard already exists.
Yeah.
They do already have to do that.
Okay.
It would be a restatement of what already exists.
Okay.
So,
I was just thinking to protect the counties.
It's just a clause that maybe they sign off on that application,
Right.
so they make
So,
sure they read it, but.
and if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, when the enforcement capabilities of the county were significantly less than they are now, I think I would lean more towards the prevention. But as the county matures and grows and has more of that enforcement capability and the appetite to enforce on people who, they change their ag structures, they engage in all kinds of businesses and they don't go through CUP processes and they don't come in for zoning clearances, you know, and we have situations like that in the county where we're trying to enforce on them and they say, well, what's going on? We've been operating this way for 2 years. And we have to say, sorry.
Yeah.
That wasn't allowed then and it's not allowed now. We just now are having the ability to pursue you for it. So, yeah, if we want to lean more on our enforcement arm, then that's a decision we can make.
I like it. I like this way better, the way he's got it worded up there.
I do too, and I think, you know, I'll just say, like, we have been lucky to not have a serious seismic event, and, you know, we're way overdue for one.
Jinx, that's why, don't you?
Hopefully not going to have one anytime soon, but,
I agree with
yeah,
that.
I think when it does happen, you know, we'll be reminded of why we have some of these conditions and requirements, especially for habitable structures and community type buildings and that sort of thing.
I guess along with that though, I'd ask, have we ever had a property fail a liquefaction study to where they could not build on that? In the history,
my
of
understanding is it's just a matter of how you mitigate that through your construction activity.
Different size
put
footings.
piers down or
It's not,
something like
it's not
that.
as if, yeah, it's just how you're gonna construct the structure. It might be more costly to implement these, whatever mitigation, geotech.
And so with, you know, have we had studies that came back and we had to put in piers or we had to put in something like that to stabilize the ground? That's just my question.
The Logan Sewer Lagoon.
The Logan Sewer Lagoons we did, but
And that was
If
why.
I could add also, a lot of this construction historically has happened in prime areas that don't have a lot of these problems. But as the county grows and as we build more and more onto the benches, into these less prime areas, in the past, no one wanted to build on them because it would have been too expensive, and why would they? There was prime land available. But now as the county grows and more of this subprime land becomes more and more attractive because of rising property values, it's possible that historical trends may not reflect the future, so.
But if we go back to your point of, we build an ag structure, and they put something in without having come before the county, isn't the liability on the landowner and not the county?
Yes, primarily yes. However, if we have knowledge of it and we don't enforce on it, then some liability may come back to us. And the county's always in the crosshairs when it comes to.
No doubt, because it's a bigger purse,
Right.
but
Don't people have to accept some personal responsibility for that? We can't
can't needlepoint govern everything.
yeah, we can't govern everything and protect them from everything and wrap pillows around them for every conceivable thing that would happen. You know, yeah, we could have that terrible earthquake and it would be horrible, but,
I mean, if I build a hay barn, I know the wind might block it over, let alone a fault
Yeah.
or an earthquake, or I might back into it with my hay wagon and it goes down either
yeah,
way, so.
so,
I got risk either way, so that's what I'm trying to say is, if you got a farmer who's trying to farm and keep it going, we need to downgrade the cost of what he's having to do to put an ag structure in, and that's what we have as an ag structure. But if eventually that goes to agritourism thing, there's gotta be a way of crossing that level and not putting, I agree, it falls on the county, but if a guy goes in his house and he builds it and then he adds on a place and puts in a stupid floor and it caves in, I don't think the county's at fault for that.
I agree.
So I'm just trying to see where we get on this thing.
I'd like to share two components that I've edited while listening to the discussion. I did not use the word waived, I changed it to do not apply, since waiving is an action of, I think, someone that would waiver from the requirement. So I propose that based on your discussion. And then should or could there still be something that it could change to the planning commission, but a geotech report may be required?
Okay,
if
I
necessary.
could see if a hay barn's built within 10 feet of a house or 20 feet or some structure failure that hits something. But is that what you're trying to say in that part or what?
Yes, so which is gonna have precedence? Is the ag gonna be exempt
20 feet of
from 5D, does not apply? Or is then they gonna still be able to turn around
The hay barn settled with the north end did.
and say, well, we might have to still do it?
It's only exempt from what's required in this section 5, which is of
does not
sensitive
apply.
lands ordinance. So the geotechnical report that identifies all of these details. But if there was some circumstance where, and sometimes we get these interesting conversations, if some landowner, farmer may argue that they feel that agritourism is accessory, it applies to equivalent of 2 months out of a year, and that they would argue that it's agriculture. I don't know where that would land in a legal analysis, but.
Well, I'm sitting here saying, if I win, I'm a farmer, and I'm very much convinced that this is just an ag thing, and you guys tell me I've got because there's a may there, now we got a difference of opinion. It almost seems there ought to be, if these conditions, if else, or something, I don't know. Legal, give me your opinion there, because.
If you want to take away that discretion, so it becomes just automatic.
Well, isn't discretion hard to define is what my concern is?
So the problem is when a question is easy to decide, then yes, automatic is helpful, because then it just happens automatically. But when you have these edge cases where you say, well, you know, he has this hay barn and there's really only people going inside it for 1 month, and it's, you know, it's only a small portion of his income, where you get into these areas where there are a lot of factors at play. At that point, that's when people complain if it is automatic. They say, well, why can't you just show a little discretion? Because if you know, if it provides, you know, if it's in for 31 days versus for 40 days, if people are inside it, you know, if you have a hard and fast line of where if it's 35 days, then it, you know, must be brought up to code and have a geotech. And if someone's at 36 days, they're going to say, oh, geez, that hard cutoff is really ruining my life. So, but in the discretion of if you have that discretion, then they can say, well, yeah, 36 isn't really that different than 35. So.
We unfortunately see some dishonesty as well in declaring an agricultural structure
Come on.
fully agricultural. It's not always the case, or you can tell it's not intended to be the case.
Well, there's that, so.
So what is a landowner's options if he comes in and the director says you have to do this and he doesn't think he needs to? Is there a second opinion on that? Because that's what I get worried about, and not that this ever happens, but oftentimes I get calls from people that think that one department or another is out to get them. Whether that really happens or not, I don't know. But giving one person that discretion is what worries me as a private citizen, that
It could be.
there's no set rule in his.
If the planning commission was land use authority for this particular item and it came before a larger body, that's an option. Otherwise, if there's, I suppose, an appeal to a director or a planning commission could go to a rather expensive hearing officer review, but.
You would hope they wouldn't have to go that far. I don't know what other commissioners think, but I just think, I mean, that position changes, you know, and personalities changes, and their opinion of what needs to be done or not changes, and so that makes it hard for landowners. I mean, the same farmer may come in and do a similar barn, and the director's changed, and now he has to do it, he didn't before, and it just, yeah.
That's my concern is.
And so just to add a little bit of context as well, this sort of same conversation that we're having now, people have it in the legal community all the time as a concern, sentencing and judges, and it comes down to whether or not you trust a judge's judgment. And if you give judges discretion, then, you know, you recognize that some people are going to say, well, this bleeding heart judge, he gave that criminal a sweetheart deal. And then you recognize that there's another portion of the population that will say, oh my gosh, this hard-hearted judge, he threw Jean Valjean in prison for 15 years for stealing a loaf of bread. And so, but if you trust the judge's judgment, then you're willing to give them that discretion, and so on those edge cases that are difficult, they can navigate that and they can make a decision. But if you don't trust the land use authority's judgment, if you don't trust the director to make those decisions, then yes, I would advise you to make it more concrete.
I like this one better.
Bringing it to the planning commission?
Well, I hope they never need to come.
I think one thing that kind
I
of,
think there is one. I would rather have 7 judges than one that makes that decision for that one individual that I mean, I don't think it happens very often.
Gives that person a alternative to
Yeah.
do that, rather than go home and say, well, one guy made a decision.
Yeah.
So I don't like it coming and you guys having to
Well, I
hear
don't
that,
either,
but
but I
at
think-
least it's an alternative. It seems like that we're trying to help the citizen out.
it's another cost and a delay of time.
It is, but it's less expensive than a site.
It may not be a cost if they get to come to us.
Well, they gotta pay, what, $600 to come here? Or $1,200 now? Hey, just, the only thing I can think of that kind of runs in my mind that I personally have experienced over the last couple of years is there was an event that should have had a CUP that didn't, and it made the paper, and it made the county out to look bad. I was contacted by probably half a dozen people. There was stacked straw bales that were deteriorated, and there was actually a whole lot of chance or risk of somebody getting hurt, but they didn't even have a CUP. And so it's kind of hard to take an event like that should have had a CUP, that should have been more governed to start with, and then restrict somebody that just wants to build a hay shed.
I mean, the reality is illegality. I mean, you can have a rave and go into a warehouse and have a rave in there and the place catches on fire. We've seen that happen. And do we change the code to make sure that that every hay barn has fire sprinklers in it? I think you have to build your code around the intended use, and beyond that, if somebody wants to do something illegal, they're taking the responsibility on them when they commit the illegal act, and so that's what I guess my concern is, that we maybe overreach sometimes because we're worried about what some people might do, not just creating the code about here's what it is. And people should do what the code says. And if somebody goes beyond that, that's an enforcement issue. That's something that we need to, and I know we haven't had the enforcement the way it maybe needed to be handled in the past, but we have an enforcement officer.
We do, yes, and that helped on that situation which you talked about, Brady. So.
How does this latest draft look to you? Besides being a run-on sentence.
So do you mean by that there would be a referral from the director and then a rubber stamp by the planning commission? Is that?
Just that if the director feels that something requires a special review to consider geotech report, that would be brought to the planning commission, and then the planning commission would make the decision whether a geotech report is required or not.
However, does this come back to where the planning commission puts in its recommendation? So if the director denies it, and now it comes before the planning commission, and you have somewhat of a recommendation from the development office, we're almost chasing the same thing in a manner, so, see what I mean?
In other words,
when
if
we sit with these things, there's usually some recommendation that comes from the development.
Oh, sure.
And sometimes we agree with those and sometimes we don't.
So,
Who has
but
the
I
final say? Is that
at least
what you're
like the
saying?
idea of, here's 7 people that, I mean, I think I could go home better saying, okay, 4 out of 7 hate it, rather than 1 out of 1 hated it. Does that make sense? Just to me, at least I had a second thought about it, but I don't know about you guys. You sit on the planning and zoning if you wanna get into that, so. I just don't
I like this option better.
Yes, than the other one, it's at least,
If I were a farmer coming in for a barn and was told I needed a seismic study, it was gonna cost $5,000. At least, yeah, you
well,
get
you
a second
come back
opinion
and
on it.
present it to somebody and say, here's why, these guys say yes, but here's why I don't have to, or whatever, I don't know, I mean,
And we can look at what the fee for that, cause I don't know what I don't think that's a
Before
full.
this, I'm positive between 400 and 600, if not more. Well, haven't you guys paid, what'd you pay to come here? When you presented the first time, was it $600?
With the rezone, I think so.
Yeah,
With the full rezone, it depends what you're coming for. Is it
Okay.
a subdivision, you know, and so I think so if that's in there now, that the smallest one is $600, I think we could look at that and change that for a,
I think it's like we paid from 2 to 600.
if it's a referral from the development director, I think that could be waived. It just gets put on the agenda as,
Think of it as a savings of $4,800.
it doesn't require a lot of, you know, because some of those rezones take a lot of time, you know, research to get everything put together.
I think this,
And really, these questions would come up as part of the zoning clearance
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And that's a $75 fee for a primary dwelling and $35 for an accessory.
Yeah, so they've already paid that fee and they've come here for the review of that, I think.
and there will be a review of fees for zoning clearances. They're quite
Yeah.
low now and possibly go up in the future. Okay, well, that's great discussion.
That one long enough.
If you feel good about this, we'll keep it in here for now. And I will scroll up back to page 1. And we're on to the density definition. The number of acres required per buildable dwelling unit parcels. We struck the word net. That net acreage shall be calculated in the FR40, RU5, and RU2 zones by taking the total gross acreage and subtracting non-developable sensitive areas. Oh, we gotta take that, this is. Oh, yes, and the area and rights of way for roads, because those still apply to RU5 and RU2. In A10 zones, non-buildable sensitive areas and area in rights of way for roads may be counted towards developable acres for density calculation.
And I know, Chris, when we talked on this maybe 6 months ago, so I don't remember. I know the discussion has gone back and forth about the RU5 and the RU2s. Like that one we gave the recommendation to approve today. By the time they take their road right away out on that bottom road and maybe the top one and take the sensitive areas out because they've got a pond and a wetland ditch that runs through the middle, they may lose 2 acres. And so they thought today that they're gonna get 6 building lots. But when they come back for their subdivision plat, it may only be, they get 5. On one like that, 5 lots or 6 lots really doesn't matter. Right? There's no difference anyone notices driving down that road. And so I still have issue of why we're only, I can see FR 40s because those can become pretty substantial and there may be a lot of areas that are taken out of that. But the RU5s and RU2s, the few that we approve, I haven't been here a long time, but the ones I know of in the valley, there's not many that it would have changed more than 1 lot, one way or the other, which I don't think changes the feel of development from anyone driving down that road. So I would be in favor of including it for both of those zones, but I don't know what. I remember we went back and forth and then I was gone for a month or 2, so I don't know if you concreted that decision in those 2 months I was out, but I still just question why it's only A10, because I don't think in the county that feel changes on those other zones.
I think from my perspective, it's because RU5 and RU2 and FR40 have not been, can't necessarily answer the question of what is the impact. We've done a broad valley-wide analysis of the A10. It's very broad and averaged out, but the study, the discussion, the analysis of RU5, RU2 has not taken place. So don't know, I mean, appreciate your perspective, and we as staff don't have answers and analysis to share of RU5 and 2.
Can we get those? It just seems, if we're updating the zoning thing, it just seems like it makes more sense to do, I mean, to me, to do it all at once and
It's easier to
not do
standard.
one piece at a time, but I can see if you haven't done that. I just, all the ones of RU2s and RU5s that I can think of, which there's not that many, they're just, it's not gonna make a difference on those. Today's was a good example. I think there's a good chance they're gonna lose those 2 acres and lose a lot that they didn't think they were gonna lose today when they come back for that subdivision process.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just visited with Chris here a little bit, and I was just kind of thinking of some of them, like the Wellsville, the steep areas where we had, but you guys, I think it was another applicant, it wasn't you guys that had 20 acres.
It was, yeah, and
Did you
the
guys-
road wide away took them out of it.
I was thinking that it was more east of, it was more up by your neighborhood.
That's where they're at.
Yeah,
I think
But
you're
it's-
thinking of the Gulbranson one, the Mount Sterling acres.
Yeah, it was Mount Sterling. So on that one, weren't they at 20?
Yes.
But the time we took out the road right away, they'd have lost one, and they came with legal.
Yeah, so that's why that was changed in the code to 18.
And we did side with their deal on that one and gave them 2 lots.
well, we changed the code to meet that.
Limited to that.
But even there, I
But
guess,
didn't
I guess-
Council Council
oh, go ahead.
today?
Yeah, I forget whether Planning Commission recommended that the right-of-way not apply also to RU5 and 2. I don't recall, but it eventually landed on just the A10 and not all 3 of the zones throughout the discussion.
And I think we landed on that decision based on the unknowns of, because we didn't have a good overall feel of what the impact would be on those smaller zones.
and that was
so
just an A10.
And so we came together on A10 and said, well, that seems pretty clear. It's 10 acres. If there's a half acre of short there, is anybody going to notice any different on that half acre on an A10? No, that seemed pretty clear cut. And so I think that's why we ended up where we are, was kind of taking incrementally getting to that point. But I get your point. I understand it.
I'll go through and look at them. Well, it can't take more than a day to pull them up and see which ones
Just-
change one way or the other.
Just to visit with Chris here, and even comparing it to that situation and then thinking back on like the Wellsville one where it was real steep, I would be more comfortable personally leaving it where we had the direction. But if somebody wanted to come in and, just like those people in Mount Sterling did, look at it on a case by case, I don't know.
My angle on that is that gets messy.
So but how would you handle it again if we go with this? Is that saying that Mount Sterling wouldn't have an option to come in? How did that even happen?
Well, let's say instead of right of way, let's say it was there's, I don't know, 500
Steep
square
slope.
feet of steep slopes or something like that would be taken out of there. Well, they lose that secondary lot. If we go ahead with what we're proposing here, that wouldn't be counted into the density calculation. And so they couldn't develop on that steep slope, but they could have the lot because of this change, because it wouldn't be counted against them.
So how do you feel about it?
I personally think that it makes a lot of sense to take those area, or to allow those areas to be part of the density calculation. I think that's something that, we've got this, hey, I own 100 acres and part of it's steep, but down at the bottom, I can put my 10 houses on there, whereas maybe there's only 3 acres of 100 acres. Well, 3, let's say 10, just to make it easy. There's 10 acres there, well, I can put those 10 houses clustered at the bottom of that hillside. Well, does it change the overall feel of the open space? Well, not really. And did we give away anything in allowing that? No, I think we have the same density throughout the county. They're not building on unsafe slopes. To me, I think this is the way that we're able to utilize some of the properties out there that may not be developable, preserve some of the prime ag lands, because, hey, if I've got a steep slope that's going up there, well, I can't build as many houses. That's the kind of ground we want to build on, is that stuff that's not prime ag land. To me, this makes a lot of sense to deal with some of the pressures from development to allow more. But once again, I come back to, we really don't have the overall feel. I mean, we can't push a button on the map and say, here's an analysis of all of the parcels and what it would be. I mean, the one that we had tonight, it was 33 acres. Well, it would not affect that one at all unless there's more than 3 acres, then we would see that. I think in most cases, it's probably going to be a non-issue. But then we have some of these cases out there where I've got 20 acres and I've lost 1/10 of an acre to this, and I lose a lot.
I will share.
Can I bring one point?
Please, yes.
I might ask our fire guys to come up here and talk about clustering in the county, because there are some issues we're talking about there. So when we talk about doing this, we need to understand what clustering does to a volunteer fire department that's trucking in water where there's no fire hydrant or whatever. So you guys want to take some time and help us on that? I know you're here to give us some advice, so help us here.
We'll vote for the next topic.
So clustering's a complicated thing.
Yes, and so we need to understand it before we say we're going to do it.
So part of it depends on where you're at. You know, if you're in the forest, up in the FR 40, clustering has benefits and it has problems. So if I have a wildfire and it's moving into homes, it's easier for me to send a group of firefighters into a cluster of homes to protect it than to scatter individual brush trucks through multiple 12-foot wide roads 2 or 3 miles apart and spread my manpower out. So the clustering in that case works, although we would want things separated far enough that we're not going to have radiant heat problems and we have all the other WUI issues. Down in the valley, it's kind of the same deal. If we cluster with the thought of clustering in advance, so if we're going to build one house and then we set the standard 20-foot road, all that kind of stuff, and then somebody starts to cluster, and then the second house comes in, and then the third house, then it changes things. And so as it develops incrementally and not planned for, then it becomes more of a problem. Our access gets to be a little bit more difficult. Where are we going to set up that tender operation? You got to imagine we're bringing in portable tanks that are 20 feet square and multiple heavy tenders with 4,000 gallons on them. We have to have loop routes so we can drive in, dump, and drive out instead of pull in, pull out. And it gets incrementally more difficult depending on how they're set up. So a well-planned cluster with some type of circle, one way in and a different way out, works very well. A cluster that's kind of a tree where you're driving in, half a mile and then you've got 4 homes, then you're running into more problems. So there's just a lot of configuration issues that help us and hurt us depending on how it's set up.
So in the residential area, you build a house, you're clustering, but then everybody says, okay, I'm going to put a little man shed out here or a chicken coop or anything else. I mean.
Yeah, and as you start to expand out the number of buildings and the lights with the chicken coops, which we burned down, how many of those this year? 5. 6.
Poor chickens.
Yeah, it was a rough year for chickens. Yeah, and then when you start to throw ag structures in that cluster as well, and then you start to have a density of buildings that becomes almost inner city kind of density, and then the likelihood of moving from one to the next gets to be a lot higher. We were burning a structure in Richmond just as a controlled burn, and it was 100 feet away from the next house, and we thought, we're good. Well, about halfway through the burn, we looked over and the next house was smoking just from the radiant heat at 100 feet. So, you know, radiant heat gets to be a big deal when you're talking higher densities. And we're not a city. I mean, out in the county, there is no water. So if you're trying to fight one structure and you have an exposure, I don't have any water to put on that exposure. My first engine in has 1,000 gallons, and our pumps run at about 1,250 to 1,500 gallons per minute. So essentially, I have 1 minute to 2 minutes of water if I really have to flow a lot of water, and then I'm out. And the homeowner looks at you really weird when you lay all your hoses on the ground and say, well, we'll start working on it when we get more water. It'll be 5 minutes. So.
And, you know, we do have, so we have some areas in the county that do have water systems though, right? Some of the more populated areas, I know my community, Benson, we have a culinary district.
About the only one with reliable. Cove has some water, but the pipe diameter's really small. It's really not, doesn't have the flow that we need. So we're still pulling tenders to take care of that kind of stuff. But really, Benson's the only area that has it. Now, I mean, from a global growth, what's the county going to do in the future? We either have to create infrastructure through our water districts, create more systems like Benson has, and then we can do lots of things. I mean, you look at Lewiston with 62 square miles that have hydrants everywhere. It's not impossible. It just takes effort, and somebody's got to decide at some point, when is the county going to grow to the point where countywide it's an issue and not cities you're good, county you're not, we'll do okay with water tenders, maybe we won't. You know, from our standpoint, we like hydrants. We like to have enough water to put out a fire quickly. There's a cost associated, we recognize that, but if we don't ever start, then we'll never get there.
Well, there's so many factors. I mean, if you have a farm and you cluster, but that farm field is in stubble in the fall, and it catches fire, you don't stop that. Or if it's grass or whatever else, so.
Yeah, a lot of the farm clusters moving into a structure, they've got their roads and stuff they drive around. Usually there's a fire break to some extent. We've had grass fires that have burned into buildings before, typically a hay shed or something like that, where they're burning the ditch bank and it gets into a hay shed. But it hasn't typically gotten into a formal barn or I can't think of any. Which one got into a residence?
I think into a residence, but it took out all their barns on their property.
Yeah.
The haystack on fire 2 blocks away.
Oh, that was the new.
That was that new.
Yeah.
The windy day.
So, and then you throw wind in on top of that, and then it's anybody's guess.
There's no easy answer.
But in the overall discussion, I mean, we think about clustering, maybe that becomes part of the overall discussion of, hey, if this community has, you know, let's take Benson, for example, there are hydrants out there that have adequate flow and all of that. Maybe there's density bonuses in certain areas based on that, or allow more clustering in areas where they have that, and that would that maybe gives the
push. Send all our growth to Benson for you?
No, but you know, then that gives an impetus for communities or developers, for that matter, to look at building out infrastructure to the point where we make it safer and we make it work better for fire, and the other issues that we're looking at. I mean, everybody poking a well in, I mean, I'm all for private property rights there, but in a lot of cases, having that community water system is the better way to go. We can manage our water better in a bigger scale than each person running their own well.
So, as a guideline, if there can be a guideline, we talk about clustering. When is the number of homes important, or is it always important that there is an in and an out when you're clustering?
Well, our code is any subdivision with more than 30 homes, and that's not just fire. That's any type of, it could be a hazardous material incident or something like that. That's the fire code is 30. It's with 2 accesses, yeah. For our water tender operation, if you have 1 square county mile, 1 square mile, and we're looping around that mile as an in and out, that works. But when you start to drive down a lane into a cluster, then it doesn't work anymore. I've dropped 2,000 feet of hose from a road to a barn, and then we can pump from the road to the barn, but it takes 2 water tenders or 2 engines to fill 2,000 square feet of hose, or 2,000 feet of hose. So we've lost 2 engines worth of water before we flow one out the end of onto the fire. So laying down to cluster is really difficult. If the cluster's on the main grid, it's not as big a deal.
And that, to me, that kind of information comes up in a subdivision review, which, fire and other departments get a chance to look at and review, and obviously it's not gonna include the building location and layout and driveways and stuff like that, but I think you can get some sense for how a cluster is gonna build out from a subdivision process. So maybe that's the best place to catch these kinds of concerning conditions.
Good point.
Okay.
Thanks, Rod.
If I could just draw attention to item C. We've had some discussion about this previously. I think there was some questions and concerns related to properties with a high percentage of sensitive lands that would really concentrate the clustering into a smaller and smaller area. And the question was, well, what's the capacity of that remaining developable area? And so this provision is intended to say, well, it depends on meeting all other requirements, as Chris, you mentioned, related to subdivisions. We talked about increasing the minimum of a half acre, which is the county minimum, to maybe something larger. And I think the last feedback we heard from you was, no, keep it there. Just let the well and septic spacing requirements, the required setbacks, all standards combined. We often see, the smallest lots I've seen without pressurized water in a cluster development are maybe an acre and a half in that range. And then you potentially see smaller lots than that, maybe half acre typically requires either a shared well or, pressurized water system. So there is this aspect that I know this has generated some discussion in the past and may have influenced why we've just landed on A10, is that the unknown of what's that remaining developable area. And we've had some staff discussions about when designing a subdivision, understanding how the home and the well and the septic actually lay out and influence the design of that subdivision. So there's some more to think about there. And I think for the interest of advancing this after several months of discussion, was maybe focus on A10. We're open to whatever direction you might share at this time.
Yeah, to me, the A10 is kind of the slam dunk on this. I personally would have too many concerns, I think, extending it to RU2 and RU5 at this time, but we could always revisit it, if we start to see issues. I mean, this came up because we are seeing issues in the A10. It's such a large scale type of zoning that it's literally not gonna change the character by allowing this base density to persist, you know, regardless of a sensitive land or something like that. Yeah, I really like where this is headed.
Okay.
So are you saying on that last line, Chris, that would be a requirement, that leftover land is reserved as a separate lot?
Which item is that?
Right there below the well and septic spacing requirements, the undeveloped portion of the subdivision reserved as a fourth open space lot? Because it may just be part of the 3 lots if they don't do a cluster, right?
Well, let's read it in this is kind of an example.
Yeah, that's right.
So lots in the A10 subdivision may be clustered, and then it refers to section 16 subdivision. And then, for example, a 32-acre parcel in the A10 zone could potentially be subdivided into 3 buildable lots. These could be as small as 1/2 acre, subject to meeting all required setbacks and well and septic spacing requirements. The undeveloped portion of the subdivision reserved as a 4th open space lot, that needs to be worded a little better.
I'm gonna say that,
I mean,
that's
it's
not
basic.
how it's currently configured. That would be a change, right?
I don't think so. I think if you're clustering,
Yeah, just
you're
call it
gonna
a
have a
dry lot.
leftover lot.
Yeah.
And it has to be a lot. You can't not have a lot.
But currently, if I have a 32-acre lot, I'm going to have 3 lots. One of them could be big.
Yeah.
Yes, bigger.
Yeah, if you only clustered part of it,
That's true. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so in my mind, we're adding additional lot, albeit
Well,
ag remainder or open space.
you're right. Like if in your example, these 30-acre, your A10, you can go down to 1/2 acre. So you got 2 1/2-acre lots, but then
One
The
you've got a
remainder,
29.
you're gonna have 29
acre.
acres
Yeah.
of one lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate, yeah.
So is this a change with our
I think
with
it
our
just needs to be
clustering?
worded different to
Yeah,
meet what it currently
It needs
is.
to be labeled as ag remainder or something, not
Yeah.
a 4th lot.
That's what it is now. It'd be an ag remainder is what it generally is labeled as. A separate.
I mean, it is a 4th
Yeah, it
restricted.
is restricted
Well,
lot.
it's a lot, but you almost get the idea that it's a buildable lot.
Yeah,
And
not.
9 times out of 10, people are not gonna have the 29-acre lot. They're gonna want a smaller lot so that they can
Yeah.
have green belt on the remainder.
But
there we go.
I think we'd have a problem with that one, given how the code is written, if we did that. I mean, that,
The ag remainder's
that
better.
needs to be part of one lot.
Well, it's not right now though,
No. yeah.
because if you look at those subdivisions that Dwayne Williams has done, his lots, and I could be wrong, but the remaining lot, unless he's built one less house, the remaining lot is a separate parcel from the
And if you
houses.
click on it, it says it's ag remainder non-developable if you click on the GIS layer.
Is that how we've done that? So it is a separate parcel?
Yeah, it's the
That's the only way you
remainder
can
parcel.
get, greenbelt.
The remainder parcel, and then, yeah, the legal description refers to it as a remainder parcel that cannot be developed. It's restricted for the.
Cause it's been in Mendon, Smithfield. And those, I just remember them people in Mendon come in, they were wanting to adjust one of the inside lots. Was wanting to add like another 1/2 acre or more in order to do what they needed, and so they were taking it away from the ag remainder.
It's a really good catch. I think I've improved it, just while you've been discussing, and the second sentence says, these lots could be as small as 1/2 acre, subject to meeting all required, take the parentheses out, subject to meeting all required setbacks and well and septic spacing requirements, with the undeveloped portion of the subdivision reserved as an additional agricultural remainder lot that is limited to agricultural and natural open space use.
I think that wording is,
As an example.
a lot better so it doesn't mislead somebody.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was misleading, so, okay.
Okay, well, I think this is a good thorough review, and I think we're making good progress. And those that are not highlighted, we've reviewed quite extensively in the past. Here shows where we've already taken out the public right-of-way previously. And we are now in Title 16, Cluster Subdivision Option. And for consistency, this letter H, the maximum density or number of lots allowed is based on density standards, Title 17, as defined in general definitions, developable land. Let's see, in this code or as determined by the land use authority to be in accordance with applicable county or state code. That's, make sure that reads properly. So we're saying the maximum density is based on our new standards, our new definition, developable land, in this code, or as determined by the land use authority to be in accordance with applicable county or state code. So I think the second portion of that is that if there are other limiting factors to density, such as the setbacks, such as the well septic, that those could reduce the density. Okay, in the review process, in a sensitive area determination, so we're in the sensitive lands chapter, an added provision that the Development Services Department may conduct site visits to determine if a property is subject to this chapter based on the standards within this title. Sometimes just a question of how sensitive, or is it sensitive or not, so that some additional communication could be helpful to applicant and staff. Sensitive areas, standards and development plan. With steep slopes, development is limited to the standards provided in the definition of steep slopes. So cross-reference, consistency with our definition, update. And we've addressed this section of geologic hazards not applicable to ag buildings, smaller sheds. Don't think we covered the wildfires. Wildfire hazards, as applicable, provide a description of all impacts and mitigation regarding development activities that will or are likely to impact or be impacted by wildfire hazards on the property. Measures to mitigate wildfire hazards and risks may be required based on the recommendation and review of the Cache County Fire District.
That's a great addition.
Next one, you know, as we talk geologic hazards, I mean, reality, when we look at risk, building on that wildland interface is far riskier than the long-term concern
Now,
of
if you want to
geologic
put that
hazards.
hay barn up in the middle of the forest, they're gonna make you clear around your hay barn.
Which
Makes sense.
makes sense, yeah.
I don't know why you'd put one up there, but you might.
Yeah.
That's the extent of the proposed amendments and modifications per our discussions. Thank you.
Are you guys wanting us to take action on this tonight, or come back?
I think we could recommend that planning commission potentially make a motion.
Can we just look one more time at how you worded the geotechnical for you took care of the first one by eliminating it, but just the second one, how you restated it? So I like the do not apply there, but then on the next page.
It's not the best, but it's better than what it was.
Takes more time to think about it, that looks pretty good.
I'm assuming Taylor or council will review all this
some point if they haven't already, right?
Yes, I have, I've worked extensively with our staff to.
Get to this point.
Okay.
If everybody else is good with it, I'm good with it.
I think.
Is that a motion?
Looks good, Ruth.
Is that a motion?
I'd make a motion that we suggest to the county council that we're in agreement with the draft and amendments made to the sensitive area and density definitions and cluster subdivision reference dated August 3rd, 23.
Second motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
You spent a lot of time on this.
One more done.
Pretty depth.
Now we can start on the next ordinance change.
Yeah, there's a list. It's important work. We appreciate the feedback.
What are you gonna do with your newfound time on your hands?
It looks like we're taking a 2-minute break.
Remember some pills.
Talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, take it easy. That could be.
Angie, do you know, did council even discuss the ADU stuff in this last?
They did, and he's gonna provide an update, but yeah, they pushed back on the detached roof, so it kind of separates the internal ADUs forward, revisit detached.
Internal and detached.
Yeah.
Detached was the problem,
And that-
apparently. I didn't
not
watch it, but I
detached.
heard that they said, well, we wanna hold on detached for higher infill. Which I wanna hear what
What
that
they-
is. I personally think it's handled as a dwelling. It's gonna have an address.
Get all that.
I need, it's gonna have to be fire code.
Back to our fair.
Yeah, so.
Well, if you're saying that, you're allowed to.
depress you?
Manugate from 7 to 9:30.
Someone's got to do it, or otherwise the public doesn't get any input.
I've only ever been on the receiving end.
Strollers, wagons, and carts each outside the stadium, aisles clear of people. Order call police EMTs.
so.
Try to consider everything, but it's hard. There's a lot of unknowns out
After we get
there.
done with the meetings, we go out and hit each other in the face for a while.
It's like that keyboard. Thank you. Yeah, that looks.
We try, we try.
Oh, so we set to move on?
We are. Do my re-reel for the day for like
Good to go?
Yeah, I think we're good, Tim. Let's
Okay.
finish this up.
So just a quick recap of the status of the accessory dwelling unit update to our accessory apartment ordinance. Public hearing was held at the county council, and also additional staff coordination between planning, fire, engineering, and I think the consensus of staff and understanding with some council member discussions is that more coordination between different departments related to safety standards, impacts related to the detached accessory dwelling units. I think the the fire department would appreciate more time to discuss detached in particular, and there could be some nuances that we look at more carefully. So I think council's open to considering that in the future, but more than likely, we anticipate that they will adopt the ordinance amendments with the attached and the internal, and then appreciate additional time spent between planning commission and
Are there
staff.
specific concerns brought up, or just, hey, we haven't had enough time to review this?
A combination, and if Chief Hammer would like to discuss that further with you or share any insights,
Yeah,
that'd be great,
great.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not that we're totally opposed to detached. We just thought that we need to do a little more examination. Staff had been looking at some of the other counties, and that information hadn't come back yet. But our primary concerns, again, we're talking water, access to these ADUs, especially the detached. And we don't have any really issues with the attached, with the way the ordinance was written. We deal with those normally, so it doesn't really change much. But the detached, distance to get to the building, because they're usually built behind somewhere. The access to that, now the code says you're gonna use the same existing driveway, but at what point does that bifurcate from the main garage door, you know? And if you have a detached behind, you got your garage door, and then you're gonna drive around the structure somehow, you're probably not gonna want a 20-foot driveway. You're gonna want 12 feet to go back to grandma's home. And what's our ability to access that? We need to look at that a little bit further. The distance that was in the code as written was 20 feet up to 50 feet, and as I've said before, we can have radiant heat ignition 100 feet away, so we need to look at that a little bit closer.
So your recommendation would actually be further away from the primary residence?
From a fire standpoint, yeah.
From a fire standpoint?
Yeah, so that it doesn't cause ignition with the next building over. And then one of our biggest ones is identification. You know, what is an ADU versus what is a barn versus what is a shed? And when we fight fires, especially when we're looking at going interior on a flaming building, I'm gonna look at the risk profile of that building, and if it's an ag building, then I'm not going to risk firefighter lives going in to say, is somebody in there feeding their horses? You know, probably not, and I can't think of a fatality report I've ever read. But most of the firefighter fatality reports we read, they are inside doing a search for people because somebody might be in there. And probably 98% of the time, nobody's in there and they're still dying doing that search. So we need to look at that building and what it looks like and how it's identified, so that we can say, yes, somebody's probably living there. And I've got pictures, and unfortunately I didn't send them to you, I sent them to the council. So I've got 4 pictures now of ADUs that are in the county. One of them, it's a dwelling unit with a horse underneath it. So it's somebody had a horse pasture, they built a pole barn, and then they added an apartment above it.
Yep.
Is it an apartment? Is it a barn? We don't know unless you know. There's another one, it's a big two-door garage, 2 overhead doors sitting on the back of the property, looks like a garage. At 2 in the morning when we roll in and we're dragging hose, we're thinking it's the garage on fire. It's an ADU, somebody's living in there. And then one of them looks like a she shed that's got a satellite dish on it. You know, and how would we know that somebody lives in there other than, fortunately, we know in this case. So what do they look like, and finally, how are they addressed? When they call 911, do we go to the main building? Do we go to the ADU? How do we know where to go? And I think we can resolve that one through development services. If they're going to issue a permit for an ADU, then it gets a half.
That's right. Yep.
And then a couple other issues.
We had in here as we were going through it.
One of the other issues, when you start adding these ADUs, the detached, now do they count as separate dwellings? So if you're gonna have a 30 homes on a road without a second egress, does that count towards a dwelling? Or is it an ADU? So now you're gonna have 60 homes, and obviously it won't because not everyone will have them, but are you adding the number of dwellings beyond what the code allows for the secondary egress? And will that stop development? You know, if you've got 28 homes and 3 ADUs, and then somebody else wants to build on a lot on that road without the secondary egress, they can't build on their property because somebody else has put an ADU up on an earlier one. So there's a lot of things I think that we need to just get in and resolve. It's not that I don't want to delay. I think we need to move forward on this. It is going to be a question. People are going to start moving towards this, but we just need the time to look at it, some of those things and address them.
Yeah, I feel those are great points, and I think all of them except maybe the last one are, you know, pretty straightforward to address, right? Like, we just need to write the code so that it requires these things, requires a 20-foot drive, requires a minimum distance separation or something like that. What do you think that distance should be?
My first gut check is at least 50 feet.
Yeah.
100 feet would be better.
Better, but
a quarter mile would be even better, but we're not going to do that. So, but 20 feet, we had that house fire in Amalga this spring, and it burned. It started in the chicken coop and burned the garage, and the garage was 15 feet from the home, and it ripped through the home. So we know that the 15 to 20 feet is way too close.
But the last question, I think, is, it doesn't matter if it's detached or attached, that question needs to be answered. Does this double the number of dwellings by adding an additional one? Are we getting closer to that exceeding 30 for that? Because in my mind anyway, it doesn't matter. If it's an accessory dwelling unit, even attached inside of the home, that's a separate residence unless we define it and say, it's not.
And currently, we don't if it's attached, right? 30 would be 30 whether they had attached or not?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we've even addressed that.
Because it might be, that might be the same in either scenario.
But the only way we could really address that moving ahead would be, what would we do? Would we take a new subdivision and say if there's 15 lots, the potential of them having an accessory dwelling unit, or if there's 16 lots, you're gonna have 2 accesses instead of saying 30, or how are you gonna address
I
it?
think that's the discussion, is how, which is, if you count them, you have to. If you don't count them.
Or is it a percentage?
And that's why it'd be interesting to see what other counties do maybe on that.
Only half of them might have ADUs, or a third of them might have ADUs, so you drop it by a third.
Probably percentage
It
based.
could be as simple as, what do we define?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dwelling.
In that definition, it may exclude accessory dwelling units from that calculation.
And I'd rather have the data from other counties that have already dealt with it before we.
Summit County would be a good one.
Summit's a good one, Hurricane's a good one, Washington, some of those others that have really already started to deal with this.
Is that 30 home, is that a local code or is that fire code?
It's fire code.
It's fire code. There may be a definition in that, in the fire code as far as residents.
Yeah. So there's just some things I think we need to dig into a little deeper. We talked a little bit about sprinklers, and I get the point that sprinklers are expensive, but they allow variances. They allow us to do more. We can reduce our requirements if they put them in, and that's something that might be considered. I'm going to build a home here in the next 6 months, and I've already started checking into sprinkler prices for my home, just because of my experience. It's something I'm definitely looking into, and I'll have more data on that I might be able to give you some more information. In your case, in the insurance business, do they give discounts for sprinklers?
Commercial they do, but residential they don't.
They don't on residential.
They raise your rates for that.
They raise
because-
your rates because you
could
have more
flood
floods.
damage.
Yeah, they do, they do, it's true.
Sometimes there is a problem, because if you say you have it and then there's a malfunction, then where's the liability, you know? But one question I had or suggestion would be that if we visit that sprinkler stuff again, I would rather see it as a benefit, you know, if you had sprinklers instead of a requirement.
Right.
No, yeah. We could certainly do that, and we do it all the time. You know, we have situations where steep grade road or something like that, and it's gonna be more than 10%. We've said if you're going to 12% and install sprinklers, then we're good.
Yeah.
Because it will mitigate a lot of the factors that happen that we have those standards for.
I think the building separation criteria is maybe a good one that you could, waive or say, if you have a sprinkler system, we'll let you be closer than 50 feet or something.
Yeah, and we just need to evaluate some of that stuff. So, yeah, I wouldn't do a required, I understand.
Incentivize.
Yeah, just incentivize if you want to do different things that add more risk, that will mitigate a lot of our concerns with that. So that's kind of where we're at on the ADUs. I think definitely we need to keep moving forward, but we just need some more time to really evaluate it.
You brought up some tremendous points for the rethinking.
Anyway.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
great.
Well, as mentioned, we did send our report to the state on the moderate income housing planning implementation efforts by the county, and we were just able to report that there's been a lot of good discussion, and that it's at the council level following a combined work meeting with council and commission and planning commission recommendations, and we did mention that we anticipate attached internal to move ahead of detached, that will continue that work. So I think the report reflects that we've worked hard and will continue to work hard as a county to explore these things. So thanks for all of your efforts there. Ready for the next item?
You bet.
Okay.
Finish this
So this is a
night off.
presentation that Stephen prepared, and this is something that we'd like to bring some draft code amendments to you next month to review, a kind of an additional review. And this is kind of a stunning introduction. A lot has happened in the 2023 legislative session. 35 bills introduced, 19 passed, resulting in 388 lines of code added to the Land Use Development Management Act. That's a lot. But today we're focused on Senate Bill 174, which is the biggest change to subdivision, biggest changes involving subdivision approval process. And so this is really about how counties and cities within the state review and approve subdivision applications. And, much of what our current practice is consistent with what is required, such as the legislative body cannot be the decision-making authority for a subdivision. It has to be planning commission and staff, and that's pretty much how we operate. But we could use more definition between a preliminary level and then a final level of subdivision reviews. And so those are defined in the second bullet with review time and deadlines. 15 days, and that would be business days or roughly 3 weeks, for staff to issue a report summarizing a review of a preliminary subdivision submittal. After that then goes to planning commission, or it could be staff if the council chose to have the staff review the preliminary plat, but it's been working well with the planning commission in my opinion. The 20 days for final and construction drawing reviews, up to 4 cycles. So up to a month for each one of those cycles. What's interesting is that the preliminary drawings, preliminary construction drawings are required to be submitted with a preliminary plat. So more specifically to preliminary plat, subdivision improvement plans, meaning civil engineering plans associated with required infrastructure, those are submitted. And I think what we'll need to explore as staff and the commission is to what level, right? How preliminary and how conceptual are they to provide a level of comfort that they could succeed in the final plat review. And then I mentioned the 15 business days. I did also highlight that it's 15 business days following the submittal of a complete preliminary application. And sometimes subdivision applications are missing items. And so really that clock does not tick until staff has determined that it's complete. Noting that we need to be very clear of what constitutes or what is composed in a complete application. And so that needs to be well documented. And so here's a final plat review cycle. Basically, it's the submittal from the applicant, the county review, then the county's response that is very thorough and enumerated and refers to code sections, and then the applicant's reply. So there's up to 20 business days or a month for each one of, however, up to 4 review cycles. And let's see over here, this third bullet point down. County's request for additional information or modifications shall be specific and include citations to ordinances. I think much of this we strive to do, but there's always room for some cleanup and improvement and making sure we're consistent with the state code. And then applicants as well must meet similar standards in their responses to staff. So they need to look into the code as well and refer to it.
On that last one on that.
Yes.
Are you gonna have a definition on, or that material changes? To tell them, oh, we decided that's material, you gotta start the process over?
I think we
But-
should. It'd be good to discuss that and.
I think there should be some, so that the landowner has some knowledge that, okay, if I make this much of a change, that's substantial, and we start over. Not they come in and say, well, I think you better start over that.
Yeah, and then it may come down to what takes more staff time
Yeah.
collectively as a start over.
Redo it or
an
just keep it
amendment.
going.
We'll have to look at that carefully.
That one could be another one that could use some
With these
definition.
defined deadlines and timeframes, has the county assessed what this is gonna do to manpower based on your current office?
We are starting that assessment, and we're pleased to have a new staff engineer that started, 2 weeks ago or so? And that's great. I say we, but I mean the Public Works Engineering Division has a new staff engineer. And we are enjoying having every development services, planning and zoning position full right now. And it's just a matter of training up, and we hope to get better and better. And then we'll see.
Right now, what would you guys say your average kick-out time has been? I can think of a couple subdivisions I've heard from lately. Griffin's over in Newton, Todd Davis in Cove. I mean, what is our turnaround time or our average right now before we take this into consideration on a subdivision? Are we 6 months?
Boy, there's so much back and forth, and some are tougher than others. Angie, I don't know if you have a response.
Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. I'm just wondering how the county's gonna
I would
change
say
that.
currently, everything is backloaded, so we do an initial review and then just condition everything that's missing. And so and they have up to a year to meet all those conditions. Here, it's gonna be more front-loaded, so a lot more of that information will already be addressed, like stormwater, road improvements, all of that, before they begin this review cycles. And so it should be a quicker process.
So they're gonna be given a checklist and you can't even come to us till you got this done instead of approving it and then saying, get that checklist together.
Yeah.
That'll help.
And I think hopefully more clear understanding that approval by the Planning Commission, that some think that there is approval and they maybe aren't fully aware of all the final steps required before they can start to sell a lot, record and sell a lot. All right, so a quick recap of our current subdivision approval process. We start with an optional concept plan. And that could be presented to the commission, but typically amongst staff to get early feedback. And then the preliminary plat application, where you, the planning commission, you're the land use authority. Staff provides reviews and reports. And there may be some need for some preliminary improvement drawings, but those are very conceptual typically. And as Angie mentioned, detailed out more on the back end, which is this third phase of final plat. And staff is the land use authority to review the construction drawings, helping the final plat get to a recordable stage, and getting down to the actual bonding and necessary agreements for financing the subdivision.
Hey, Tim, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Do you know how much more time you need? Because we're bumping up against our.
Whoa, 2 minutes to go.
One last slide, and then I just have to,
We don't need to extend the meeting.
I do have a question. I'd like to invite afterwards resource management plan discussion for those to be interested in participating in that. But the new process, so I don't think so, Chris.
Okay.
But new plan, new required process. Pre-application is optional, a request by the applicant, but the county must provide that. We'd like to look and see if we can require a pre-application. And then just the days, the timeframes to review. And I think it speaks for itself there, but we'll go through this process, and this is something we need to have done towards the end of the year so that we can meet the state required deadline of February of '24.
So that 15 days, so if they get their complete to you on the Friday after our monthly meeting, it's a month out, right? So what, like a lot of city councils, city planning commissions meet every 2 weeks to meet that. Because I remember sitting in some of these hearings as this went through the legislature, because I like to go down there for some reason. But that was a lot of the concerns. These, in some cities, don't even meet every month, you know, really small communities. And so that was one of the questions is, how do we meet that if they meet that more than 2 weeks before our next planning commission meeting?
We'll look carefully. I think Stephen, his impression is that we could stick to our monthly planning commission meetings, and that really it's about a response within 15 business days and then scheduling the next available planning commission meeting.
But probably the takeaway for the planning commission is we're not going to continue and say, let's talk about this next month.
We really get one shot at it, the planning commission.
Once it's complete and everything's there, we need to take action one way or another.
We get one shot.
Yeah, one shot at it.
Yep.
With a lot of detailed studies provided for you, yep. Okay, so I just have one separate question, and typically you ask Angie what's on the docket coming up, so if we could take a minute just to run through that, maybe.
If we can extend the meeting by 15 minutes, just in case.
Not a chance.
All right, you got about 30 seconds, so you better hurry.
No, I mean, you can close the meeting and we can still have a
That's
conversation.
true, all right. With no protest, we're gonna count the meeting.